Hi guys. So before we talk about using IFS with someone with DID, I thought it would be important to spend some time talking about the etiology of a lot of these dissociative disorders. Um, the textbook says that a lot of risk factors for dissociative behaviors is early onset abuse and continued exposure to abuse. And then the DSM, specifically for dissociative identity disorder, states that 90% of individuals with DID report multiple types of early neglect and childhood abuse that often extended into late adolescence. This is an aspect of DID that I wasn't exactly expecting, which now that I look back on it, I'm not sure why I was missing that. Um, Obviously, an immense amount of exposure to abuse will cause an individual to, develop these dissociative behaviors that are kind of like a coping mechanism. And so, um, I think like approaching treatment for someone with DID and keeping in mind the amount of abuse that they may have gone through to lead them to a place where they have several personalities is really important. So the textbook talks about some general treatment for DID, and the goal of like that therapy, it's like a 3-step process. The goal of it would be to establish a stable environment for ego strengthening. And so, regardless of your therapeutic model that you choose, um, the goals of that would be creating safe space for safety, stabilization, symptom management, reduction, processing traumatic material and memories, and then integrating resolution and rehabilitation. And they kind of emphasize the need to go slow and not to rush the process, because if we're moving on to a step where a part isn't ready, it can cause much further damage. So only moving on to the next stage when it's appropriate and when the part is ready, and being okay with returning to stages if that's also necessary. So this kind of bleeds into using IFS. The goal of IFS would be to facilitate cohesiveness and positive cooperation between the client and all parts of the client's internal system. And this definitely correlates with the textbook's general treatment or the general process of treatment. IFS includes accessing and negotiating with manager parts and helping parts develop and show compassion for each other, and then moving into working through the traumatic material, helping them develop coping skills, and help have them select memories, and then allow one part to witness the traumatic event of the other part. And so this kind of unburdening process is what needs to happen before integration can happen. And IFS really emphasizes the idea that there's no need to pull traumatic memories to the surface. As a therapist, that parts will kind of review or address the trauma when they're ready. And so that kind of reinforces the idea that us facilitating that needs to be handled with care, because if we are kind of going faster than our client's pace and what they're ready for, then we can re-traumatize them and put them at a risk for self-harm behaviors, which actually leads to a few of my ethical and legal concerns. I think suicide ideation is something that needs to be emphasized. The DSM states that so over 70% of outpatients with dissociative identity disorder have attempted suicide, have had multiple attempts, and have engaged in other self-injurious high-risk behaviors. So that's a pretty large percentage. And so you kind of know, well, personally, legal and ethically, suicide risk is right at the top of my concern. And so the textbook kind of emphasizes our need to do suicide assessments with every part, at least that we know of, and continuously doing suicide assessments, and obviously documenting this. If you didn't document it, didn't happen, right? And so, yeah, another part of that is an ethical or a technical concern for me is determining intent and means when it comes to these different parts. I think it's going to take a lot of training or having a really great supervisor, someone who's experienced in DID, to know or to be able to determine when 911 needs to be called, because if the part doesn't have intent or they don't have means, we need to not be making a call every 2 seconds. But I guess that's kind of for anybody. But that is still an ethical and legal concern that I have. But I guess it's just kind of heightened in the situation of DID. And then our textbook also tells us that we need to review consent with each part, educate each part on the goal of therapy, which would be integration, and be conscious not to disclose the presence of another part or the trauma that another part has experienced before the part you're talking to is ready to share that. Once again, because that can lead to further traumatization, and that is not, that wouldn't be us protecting our client. So we need to make sure we're not re-traumatizing them. And then when it comes to power dynamics, and then practical challenges of implementing a treatment, if I were to use SFBT, which is kind of what I've been trying to use, I think I would have a lot of practical challenges, which makes sense, and that would lead me to kind of probably not use SFBT with someone with DID and definitely use IFS, just because I can't really conceptualize how preferred future would look like, the preferred future of each part, and how we would find a preferred future for the true self of the client. Exception questions, some parts won't know. I just don't think that SFBT would really work super well. I'm sure aspects of it would, but I can see it bringing up a lot more challenges than maybe something that IFS would be more equipped to handle. But one specific challenge that I thought of, it kind of boils down to the whole, a core foundational belief of SFBT, which is that the client is the expert of their own life. And so if I'm following that and I'm okay, the client is the expert of their own life, and in my head I know that the goal for my client with DID is integration, but that's not what they want. Where does that leave me? What if a part has unhealthy threats to the entire individual? Then what? If something unhealthy is that part's preferred future, where does that leave me? And so I think choosing a model that fits your client is important, and not necessarily something that is therapist like driven. Just because SFBT works, or that's how my brain conceptualizes things, doesn't mean that's the best fit for my client. And I also think when it comes to like power dynamics, I think that generally joining with a client with different parts will be really challenging. And also kind of using your power in a sense to drive therapy in a way that keeps the client's best interest at heart. Just because that kind of goes back to, what if my client doesn't want integration? Where does that lead me? And would using my power as a therapist be unethical in that situation? Or would it be me having the client's best interest at heart? So those are just my general concerns. I think that realizing and accepting that I probably know a very, very, very small percentage of what needs to be considered when working with someone with DID effectively is okay. And considering continuing education, or like I said, consulting with other professionals that have experience with DID would be the best steps in addressing these concerns. And also just being aware of what to look for will probably take us a long way. So yeah, that is all my thoughts.